Hi, and welcome to the OT is In, the podcast where we merge the worlds of education and occupational therapy to empower families like yours. I'm Sarah Collins, your host, an occupational therapist and a homeschooling parent. I've experienced occupational therapy by supporting families for over 15 years, but also through seeking out support of my own children. So I'm right here in the trenches with you. Though there is not one way to educate your child, there is a lot to consider when individualizing an education. And the goal of this podcast is to explain some of the why behind what an occupational therapist is thinking so you can apply it to your own family. Especially with my three favorite topics: executive functioning, handwriting, and sensory processing. Each episode will be packed with practical tips, expert interviews, and real-life stories aimed at helping you to create a supportive learning environment for your child. So, grab your headphones and get ready to dive in of the collision of education and occupational therapy. I'm Sarah Collins from Homeschool OT, and I'm thrilled to have you with me on this journey of discovery. Hey, and welcome to episode 45 of the OT is In podcast, where I, your host, Sarah Collins, sit down with my really great friend, Colleen Kessler. Colleen is the founder of Raising Lifelong Learners and the author of The Homeschool Advantage. In this enlightening conversation, Colleen shares her unique approach to homeschooling with a focus on finding learning opportunities and tailoring education to each specific child's needs, especially for neurodivergent or gifted children. So we'll delve into her personalized education for each of her children, the power of asking questions, leveraging community resources for unexpected learning experiences. Colleen highlights the importance of project-based learning, sharing inspiring stories of her children's diverse educational journeys, from glassblowing all the way to environmental projects. So whether you are a homeschooling parent or simply interested in creative educational strategies, this episode is packed with invaluable insights and practical tips. So don't miss Colleen's advice on balancing a child's interests with essential life skills. Tune in for a rich conversation about raising lifelong learners. Now, on with the show. Hey there, listeners. It's Sarah Collins, the host of the OT is In. Thank you for being here. And guys, the new year is here. Can you even believe it? It's the perfect time to pause and reevaluate your homeschooling rhythms, build on what's already working, but let's be real. Sometimes homeschooling can feel overwhelming, especially when it comes to meeting each child's unique needs. That's where Homeschool OT comes in. So with over 16 years of experience as an occupational therapist and 7 years here as a homeschool mom, I get it, and I've been there. I've had times where our homeschool felt peaceful and that it was supporting and serving our children well. I've also had times where I knew I needed help and to build my team. I've said it before, and I will continue to say it repeatedly: homeschooling is not alone schooling. So if you need help to figure out what that means, I have two resources for you. First, Why Choose OT is a downloadable guide designed to help families understand the role of occupational therapy in homeschooling. It answers key questions, explains how OT can address challenges like sensory processing and handwriting, and helps you decide if OT is right for your family. And the second, the OT Service Provider Guide, offers practical advice for finding and collaborating with an OT who aligns with your homeschooling needs. So this guide simplifies the process of identifying providers who understand goals and can deliver the right support. Both resources empower parents to create tailored, effective learning experiences for your children. So explore these tools and start transforming your homeschool today. You can find those at homeschoolot.com/shop or find them here linked in the show notes. Thank you for being here. Now let's get on with the show. Hey, welcome back to the Homeschool OT, the OT is In podcast. I have today with me my very good friend, Colleen Kessler. You can hear us actually banter back and forth quite frequently on her podcast, Raising Lifelong Learners. And here we've podcasted before. If you're in my house, you can hear Spock's day to day, but there you get a whole lot of ums and uhs, which we won't have here. So, Colleen, first, can you just introduce yourself here to the Homeschool OT listeners?
Sure, yeah. I'm Colleen Kessler, the founder of Raising Lifelong Learners. I have a podcast, a website. It's all about homeschooling outside the box thinkers, neurodivergent kiddos, gifted and twice exceptional. We have a learning community that is called the Learners Lab and relates to all sorts of creative thinking and social and emotional themes with classes for kids, clubs for kids. We have some like low impact, I guess it's not low impact, it's like low stress meetups for the
There you
kids where
go.
they can just get in and discuss their interests like Legos and all sorts of things. And I've been doing this for a long time. I have a 22-year-old homeschool graduate. We pulled him out when he was in first grade. So I've been doing this a really long time. And my younger three kids, one is a graduating senior, crazy how fast time flies, and a 15-year-old freshman, and an almost 12. He'll be 12 in 2 days.
Fun.
Sixth grader, and none of the three of them have ever been to school. So they've been homeschooling all along and are doing just fine, actually. I've been homeschooling, I've been coaching families just like yours and working with people to help them know that they can homeschool their differently
Yeah.
wired kiddos.
And side note, if anyone is working on getting their children into MFA programs or BFA programs, Colleen is the person to go to at this point. She's been going through this entire year with auditions. And in fact, we're squeezing this in between auditions for her daughter, which I just think is the coolest that you really, one of the things we're going to talk about today is following our kids' passions. And you really have dove into this hardcore with your daughter. Is she okay if you tell us a little bit about
Sure.
what's coming up next and what that
Yeah.
looks like?
It's a crazy process. So she plans to pursue a Bachelor's of Fine Arts, a BFA in musical theater. And because BFAs are typically performance-based programs, if they're in the performing arts like music, vocal performance, theater, acting, musical theater, all of those different things, instrumental, they all require auditions. And then some of the other BFAs in fine arts, visual arts, or like composing or stagecrafting require portfolio. So it's like an audition as well.
Yeah.
But the unique thing about going for a BFA program instead of just a typical like bachelor's of science or a bachelor's of arts is that it requires two acceptances. It requires you to be accepted academically to the college as well as artistically to a program, and they're independent of each other. So you have to apply just like everybody else to all the colleges, all those essays and all of that. But then on top of it, you need to send in pre-screen videos, which are like pre-audition videos,
Yeah.
2 songs, 2 monologues, dance, ballet, and a wild card that could be about anything. And then once you send those in, you get a pre-screen yes or no that is basically just an invitation to audition for their program. So it's not even an acceptance into the program. It's a yes, we like you enough that we want to see more of you to see if you fit. And then you do what we will be doing very soon here. She has passed the pre-screens to over 22 schools. So we'll be auditioning
Oh,
for those. And that starts actually in 3 days. We will be in New York auditioning for 3 different schools. And then she has a week off. And then she auditions for at least 2 schools a week for all of January and February. And then there's a chunk of time where we're in a hotel and a bunch of schools come to it. And
yeah.
she'll be auditioning for 10 schools there.
Which
Yeah, and
actually
then
makes me wonder, like, how does anyone who isn't homeschooling do this?
seriously,
Because,
I don't
yeah,
know because we've been just stretched to the limits
yeah.
with the even just the triangulation of it all. And it seems like a lot when you think about 22 schools or whatever. We actually applied, we're still waiting to hear back from a handful. We applied to over 33 schools because the while she's been academically accepted to all we've heard from so far, the artistic acceptance negates the academic acceptance if she's not accepted into those programs. And the programs are actually statistically more difficult to get into than the Ivies because Harvard or Princeton or whatever,
Yeah.
they have about a 3 to 4% acceptance rate, and these programs have about a 0.1 to 1%
My
because of
goodness.
they only take about 12 to 20 students a year for their cohorts, and some take as few as 8. She has to cast a very wide net because
Yeah.
there will be more no's than yeses, no matter how good she is.
Yeah.
It's a roller coaster of a process, and it started in October and won't end until March, and then we wait because the acceptances trickle in as the
Yeah.
auditions finish up. And so we won't hear until the end of March or beginning of April from all of the schools.
Wow. As we are talking about this, one of our main topics today that we want to cover, because you are the expert in this, is project-based learning.
Mhm.
And so much of that you've had to do throughout your life and her life because this is what she's interested in. So much of your homeschool has been geared down this path, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it's been, and the stuff that isn't directly related has been wrapped around the other stuff. So she's
Mhm.
taken a lot of acting classes and master classes and vocal training and dance training and
Yeah.
one-on-one coaching and different things like that. And so I know we're going to talk about it, the difference between like interest-led and unit
Hmm.
studies and
Hmm.
project-based. I would classify her path is more of an interest-led path because we've dived heavily into her interests and
Okay.
then wrapped any of the content areas within her interests. When she's doing literature or reading any kind of work, it's usually Shakespeare, and she's analyzing both the performance aspect of it as well as the literature aspect of it. And when she's watching movies, she's analyzing them and comparing them to the script or the book or both. You can take a show like Les Mis and you could compare the movie to the musical to the book to all sorts of
Yeah.
different adaptations. And so we've really put all of her content into her interests. And then my younger one, who was really into the solar system for a while, we could just hyper focus on a unit study of the
Right.
solar system where we're pulling in all the subject areas through books and through math problems that center around the distance from the moon to wherever, or the sun to the different planets, and building
Yeah.
scale models and stuff. Project based ends up being a little bit different where you're finding something to solve and then you're working your schooling around like a real world challenge or issue or problem. And actually, Trevor is an example of that. My oldest did a work study kind of program that he was accepted into, I think his sophomore or his junior year of high school. And it was working with Case Western Reserve. And it was an after school high school program where they worked on citizen science projects, the distribution of amphibians and reptiles within the watersheds
Oh.
of Northeast Ohio. And that's problem based, right? Because they're trying to
Right.
figure out the health of the environment based on the distribution and how far they're migrating and why they're migrating. And they took all sorts of water samples and caught reptiles to do population surveys and things like that. Like right there, you can see the three kind of
The three
differences
different ones. Yeah.
between the different ways that you can approach kids' interests.
Yeah. Okay, so let's back up a little bit then,
Yeah.
because there are so many families that come to me and they're like, Sarah, my child is only motivated to do this one simple thing. Like you could take Legos or you could take YouTube videos or you could take whatever. And they're so for trains, even. I have a family who their child is so into trains. And what we used to do in the OT world is different than what we've talked about now, where the research is going towards a lot of the neurodivergent community wants to learn until saturation, right? They just want to keep with the same thing until they have nothing else that they want to learn about it anymore. And that is so fascinating. And in fact, there are things when I look at even myself as an OT, I'm like, I dive into kinesiotape until I know everything about it. Or then I dive into, for a while, I was really interested in hand surgery. And so I was diving right into that. Now I study how homeschool and OT relate. And so it makes sense as we get older, but for some reason, when kids are younger, we're like, no, we can't do that. You can't just focus on one thing. But you're really talking about three different ways that we can take children's interests and really follow them through either interest-based or project-based or unit study,
Mhm.
and given some beautiful examples. But what do you say to a parent when they're like, how do I get my child motivated outside of that?
Yeah, so that's really hard because there's a lot of different reasons for a lack of motivation, right?
Mhm.
Some of it could be just that perseveration
Yeah.
gene, whatever that's
Yeah.
in, or the drive that's in our kids who might be autistic or have ADHD, especially those two
Hmm.
diagnoses. They tend to perseverate on a topic and hyper focus and hyper fixate for long periods of time. And so it's really hard to break through a perseveration drive to get them motivated to do anything else versus somebody who is not motivated to do something because it's really hard, because whatever their twice exceptionality or neurodivergence or learning challenge is, it's like stuck in that area or that way. And so first we really need to identify, why are they undermotivated to do this? Is it really because they just want to do video games all day long? Or is it because the other stuff is hard in a way that makes them feel less? And then we need to address it from that perspective. Also, there is a time, especially within homeschooling and parenting, where we need to do things, our kids need to do things that they don't really want to do necessarily, because part of that is life and living. Because while you can dive deeply into whatever topic you're studying for your OT clients right now, you can't do that and exclude the need to do your laundry or buy groceries or prepare meals or make sure your kids are cared for. So even as adults, when we dive deeply or perseverate, we can't just say, I'm only motivated to do this, so I'm not going to do those other things. And I think it's important for us as homeschooling parents to help our kids know that sometimes we have to do things because we have to do things. And then the beauty of it is we have, as homeschoolers, all of this time.
Yeah, so much extra time, right?
That we can really do the thing we want to do, but we just have to get through that other thing. So for me, when I'm working with a client, or even in my own homeschool, because believe me, my kids, we've butted heads over those exact kinds of issues, right? For me, that was identifying, like, what are my main must do's, like the things that like I don't feel successful as a parent who's homeschooling my kids and preparing them for the future without them doing. And really it's simple. Like I just have the basics, and that's math, a basic math lesson a day. When we're talking about those, when the kids were younger, it was a workbook and they did a workbook page. Even if that workbook page wasn't a whole lesson, they did a page of math every day, and they did a page of handwriting every day because it was something that they didn't love, but it moved them towards being a cohesive writer and being a confident mathematician to some degree. And now we use an online program, and so they have to do a couple of lessons of that each day. But then the rest is so open. And the main reason for that, for me, that is my choice as a parent who is homeschooling my kids, I don't want to have to think about how to wrap math into everything else.
Yeah.
And so that's the choice that I made. And and I've talked to them about it. Look, you don't love math. I don't love math. You want to do all of these other things, and we can hit reading and writing and comprehension and like intuition and interpretive language and all of the different things that we need to hit through the topics you're interested in. But I don't want to have to figure out math in there. So I do want you to do a math lesson a day. That's where I don't care that they're not motivated to do it. If they want to have the privilege of spending the majority of their time taking voice lessons and dance classes and private coaching and being in a musical at a school that's 45 minutes or a theater that's 45 minutes away and want me to drive them, then they're going to do that particular thing. My middle, they're not middle because there's four of them, but my oldest daughter started taking a crocheting class. It's at the most inconvenient time ever. It's 7:15 to 8:15 on a Monday night, like right in the middle of rehearsals and driving kids to things and dinner and bedtime and whatever. It's fine. If she wants to do that, I will make the time. I will find the rides. I will coordinate the schedules, but math gets done every day, and then you spend your time on something else that's productive. And so the motivation comes in when we are figuring out why it's a problem, figuring out what your must-dos are, working through those, and then dive into whatever. If they're only interested in Legos, you can wrap Legos into a lot of different things. When Trevor was really young, he did a lap book. And he studied Denmark. He studied the history of the Lego Corporation. He studied all sorts of iterations. He did a timeline. He did a build. He built a Lego flag of Denmark and put it in the lap book. And built all sorts of creations and came up with his own ideas and then presented it to the family when he was done with it. And it was a basic lap book. A couple years earlier, we were doing things via lap books because they were visual and I could cut them into bite-sized pieces for him at the time. So that's why he did lap books. My other kids, some of them have done lap books, others have done papers and projects, but the lap book, he did another one that was a solar system one that had like flaps that flapped out of other flaps. It was this like never ending book
goodness.
because he was so interested. He spent weeks and weeks on it.
So do you have, for people who have not heard that term lap books before, can you explain that a little bit and maybe and I'll put some links in the show notes as far as like some examples to look at.
Yeah, I've got a couple posts on my site from like eons ago. So if you remind me, I'll send them to you so you don't have to search them out too.
Okay.
And then there's a couple sites that I like for them. Basically, a lap book is a unit study. That is, it's the way it's presented that's called a lap book. So you take a file folder and you fold it in a specific way. So it like has a window pane kind of flap open or a shutter design. And you're learning about a topic. You're deep diving into a topic with all these little mini books. And you do the mini books and then you paste them into the lap book. So when you're all done with your unit study or your project, it's this like, it's actually, they're interesting to look at.
Right? My daughter did one for American Heritage Girls when she was in that program forever ago. It was like at the very beginning and it was I don't know what the creed was and something, I don't know. But it was really beautiful when she was done.
My daughter Molly pulled some of her old lap books out to show her boyfriend recently. It's like they're still on our bookshelf. And so they're just, the reason they're really great actually for neurodivergent kids is because those mini books are so bite-sized. You're finding out one thing. Like when we were doing the geography years and years ago, we would do a different country every week and we would do like a lap. We ended up putting those, they were still the lap book mini books and we put them in a binder, but we would do a population one. So the mini book was just the population of certain cities within the country and then the country as a whole. And then we did a geography one that like showed the topography. And then we did like fun facts about it and a recipe about it. So every single thing was like they could focus on one aspect of this big, giant topic. And if they were on the ball that day or really into it, we could do 5, 6, 8 mini books. If they were not, we could do one, call it a day, and then move on from there. So they're really good for neurodivergent kids because you could break it down to really small bite-sized chunks and you could do as many of those chunks as they have the stamina for that day.
Yeah. And which again is another way to follow their lead. If we're saying, okay, we're going to work on just this one problem or this one part of it, get that done, then we're starting and finishing. You can say what the end point is and then move on to whatever else the priority is for that day. And that giving the start and the finish can be really important to help our kids to even know how to prioritize, how to break things down to a chunk, into a bite-sized piece or into a chunk. Even if we're doing it for them at the beginning, they're still practicing that skill as it goes along, which those are all executive functioning skills.
Yeah, and actually, I think that unit studies, particularly when they're organized in a way that you're doing those bite-sized chunks, like a lap book or a different because really a lap book is not, it's just a presentation format, right? It's a really good way to help set your kids up who struggle with executive function skills for managing expectations and compartmentalizing tasks and having start and stop points and having a good stopping point. So they're not stopping in the middle of something and not being able to move on. We're doing in the Learners Lab, this is airing in January, and the month of January, our theme is, we always have a social and emotional or some kind of executive function theme, and it's managing expectations. When you have things in bite-sized chunks, you help your kids learn how to manage expectations. They learn how much they can do in a day. I'm notorious for totally overblowing what I think I'm capable of and then feeling like a failure at the end of a day or a week or a month or a year because nobody is physically capable of
doing what that goal that you've set, right? There's not a chance that can be accomplished. Yeah, I get that. Are you a homeschooling parent who's reevaluating your curriculum this January? Well, it is the perfect time to take a fresh look at what's working and what's not. So if math has been a challenge in your home, CTC Math might be the game changer that you're looking for. CTC Math is a comprehensive online math program designed with homeschool families in mind. So whether your kids are struggling with tricky concepts or flying through their lessons, CTC Math offers flexibility, self-paced lessons, and clear, easy to understand explanations that meet your family's unique needs. With CTC Math, parents can step back and focus on other parts of homeschooling while their children gain confidence and mastery in math. Plus, the family membership makes it affordable for households with multiple students. It's January. Don't let another semester go by without the right tools. So visit ctcmath.com to start your free trial today and make this the year that your family loves math. Now, back to the show. Okay, so if we're thinking about unit studies and definitely having a lap book that can, or not definitely, but having a lap book that can show for that. So explain a little bit more about what the difference between something like that versus the project-based learning.
Sure. Okay, so a project-based learning is focused on a project. Now, most of the time we think of projects as the finished product.
Yeah, so somebody might say he's doing a lap book, isn't that the project?
And so it certainly can feel that way and can be that way. And a product like a lap book or a presentation board, like a science fair board type thing, can be a project if it solves a problem. Project-based learning is about solving real-world problems. It's about your kid who comes to you and is in their just sweet, neurodivergent, sensitive, justice-driven way is worried about birds coming up to oil slicks or whatever, right?
Yes, that's a very real concern.
Right, an environmental concern. And you can tackle project-based learning helps to show kids who especially are justice-minded that anybody can do something good and build their life around fixing or solving a problem. And so you would take a step back from that and say, okay, you're right. You can't go out to the middle of the ocean and clean up the oil slicks on your own. But what can we do? We can research, why is that a problem? Where is that a problem? What is the impact? What can we do in our community to help make sure those things don't happen? Could we buy more socially conscious products? Could we change our spending, our eating, our political habits? Could we write letters to elected officials to try to make change? Could we get on the board of something local that could make an impact locally, because we've got ponds and streams and things like that? And so we take a big view, and then we step back further and further till we find something tangible that our kids can do. For example, with the project that Trevor had done when he was younger, that was an organized project. But you can figure out the health of the environment and develop a project around it by saying, okay, what are indications of a healthy environment for reptiles and amphibians? In Northeast Ohio, we have indicator species. We have spotted salamanders, red-lined salamanders, and a couple other species like wood frogs. They come out during a migratory period in the spring. My kids could learn about vernal pools. They could learn about the ecosystems related to that, the science of it, the timelines, because they migrate to the vernal pools and away from the vernal pools. Like there's set times, right? And then they can go out when that first rain that hits all of the right temperatures. We could go out in an evening, which we've actually done, and take a survey of how many spotted salamanders are we seeing in a 2-hour period. Are we seeing wood frogs? Are we seeing the fairy shrimp in the pool when we get to the pool? Are we seeing egg clusters laid? How deep are the pools? And then we could go back in the daytime and see if we can find the egg clusters. And then we could write up about it. So we could do some writing, we could do some research, what shows a healthy environment. And then if we notice that there's a problem with it, we could go and talk to the rangers at our local parks and see if there's a way we can get involved, or if there's a citizen science project related to it. We tagged butterflies a couple years ago because my kids were setting up a migratory garden in our backyard. We were doing like a monarch butterfly way station. Yeah. And to see the actual monarchs where we knew they were going to come, we hooked up with a group in the metro parks that were tagging one day with park rangers. And we went and we caught butterflies. It's actually really interesting and easier than you think to tag a butterfly. There are things, so a project, and all the examples I've given you are environmental, but it could be other things too. Like, how do you get, even if you're not actually doing it and going to city council, how do you go about planning and getting commissioned a new playground for an area that doesn't have one, or a community garden, or a recycling project, or these are still environmental that I'm coming up with. But any kind of thing that's going to make the world a better place, even if it's actually something that's going to make your home a better place. We've got these dust balls everywhere from our dogs. They're constantly shedding. Is there something that we could do differently around our house? That is a good project-based learning topic, because the end goal is finding a solution for an everyday problem.
I actually really love this, even to go along with my kids with their chores on their day-to-day basis. Once they hit about 10 years old, and so my youngest son is on his way there, we started something which we called notice and respond, right? Because before that, it's like, all right, your job is to whatever, sweep the stairs or something like that. I do look at them in terms of core strength, and I look at chores very differently than the average person does. I know you're not looking at sweeping the stairs and thinking, oh, my child needs core strength, so that's what we're going to do. Wiping the floorboards. My middle son, who needed to reach across his body more often, I was like, you're in charge of wiping the floorboards. But anyway, once they get to about 10 years old or so, and I'm really starting to hone in on some of these executive functioning skills, I call it notice and respond. And then, hi, honey. I call it notice and respond, where they have to notice something that's going on, and then what are we going to do to solve that problem? And that's even just in our home. And we start with, in the front room today, this is what I want you to look at. Do you see something that needs to be cleaned or needs to be done? And so if we take that at a really small scale and then make it bigger, that's really what all of project-based learning is, or what your examples are.
Absolutely. We do the same thing, actually. I just recently restarted it with my youngest, and I just call it notice and do. And that's like my mantra, notice and do.
Yeah. Because I want you to start to be observant around you, and I want you to react to what you're observing. But all right, I recognize that there's probably someone out there who is like, all right, I can ask these questions that you're saying, but that seems so daunting to have to follow my child. And then all of a sudden I'm out and looking at vernal pools, and I don't have any interest in looking at vernal pools. And my other 4 children have no interest in doing that. So how do we follow along here? So what do you say to that parent? Like, how can we follow a person's interest when maybe it's not everybody else's?
Yeah. So you can't always follow everybody's interests, right? You can do it in different ways. And again, project-based, unit studies, interest-led learning, child-led, all of those different terms are just the vehicle for finding your kid's spark, helping them spend more time doing what they love, less time doing what they don't, focusing on their strengths, shoring up their weaknesses through their strengths, all of that kind of stuff. But you can't hit everybody equally all the time. You just can't. And so sometimes, again, kids are going to have to do what they don't want to do because someone else is interested in it or whatever. So when my kids were younger, especially, so I'm in a different place than I was 5-10 years ago. When they were younger, we kept a chart paper or sticky note or whiteboard in our common area, and we would just write. We usually did it at the beginning of the year, but then would often add to it different things we want to learn about. And we would have our kind of core things, and then the different activities that everybody had on their own outside of the home, which included theater for some and environmental stuff for others and Legos for others. And then the kind of together time where we were doing science or history or the content areas that aren't as grade level dependent, we would swap that. This person wanted to learn about the human body this year, and this person wanted to learn about the life cycle of bees and visit a hive this year. So we would spend a couple weeks on each, but everybody would do that. So even if that wasn't your interest, we would do that kind of as a group, and then you could split off into your individual interests after your must-dos were done. And then you're not always going to be able to find a vernal pool. They don't exist everywhere in the country. You're not going to be able to find things that are related directly to your kids' interests all the time in person. And so they're going to need, that's where a more intrinsic motivation tends to come in.
Mhm.
If they're interested in something, they're going to learn how to do something as they get older and more mature. You don't have to do all the things for your
Yeah.
kids all the time.
Mhm.
And there are going to be some seasons where you really can lean in to all of the applications to a BFA and auditions and coaching and whatever. And other times where you're all in on something else, that's okay. That's
Yeah.
okay. There's an ebb and flow to it, and you're not always going to be able to find what they want or what you think they need. And so you're going to have to do the best that you can. The other thing is, you're not responsible for making every single moment fun and interesting. And
Yeah.
you just absolutely can't do that. You need to do what you can do and then let go of what you can't do and not beat yourself up over it, because any day at home in the way that you're teaching your kids with them at the forefront is better than any day away from you. So you're
Yeah.
already giving them a better and more focused one-on-one education than they would have gotten anywhere else, because nobody loves them like you do. Nobody is like
Boom.
tailoring it to them like you are or would. And if you can't find this or you don't know what to do, maybe that's even the question. Maybe you're a mom sitting here listening to this and you're like, okay, I can do some of this and I've got the time and I've got the means and we've got a lot of resources in our area, but I don't even know where to begin. I don't
Mhm.
know what questions to ask my kids. When I ask them what they want to learn about, they say, I don't know. I don't know how to do any of that. And what I would say to you is you just try a bunch of things. And if it doesn't stick, don't put ownership on that. Don't make that personal. This is, I'm going to borrow a term from unschoolers. Strewing in unschool speak is like putting out stuff, like a feast so they can wade through it and find their interests. I'm going to expand that definition a little bit,
Mhm.
and that's just exposing your kids to a lot of different things. My kids have gone to a glass blowing class that we found locally that also had a blacksmithing component to it. One of my kids loved the blacksmithing, and he ended up taking a couple years of like private blacksmithing classes,
So
like
cool.
just a couple times throughout each of those years because they were expensive and we could only do so much of it.
Mhm.
Everybody else really loved the glass blowing. So every 3 to 6 months, we'd go back and we'd try a new technique with the glass blower. It never became such a passion for any of them that I needed to dive deeper into it, but touching back on it every once in a while is worthwhile. They would have never known what it was like to blow
Mhm.
glass if I hadn't found this random homeschool class that was offering a deal. So find those different opportunities, even if it's like free stuff through the park system. The first salamander hike we ever went on was something I read about in a little, like one of those little things those like local parent magazines you can
Yeah.
find free
Mhm.
at the grocery stores. Like it was advertised in there. And so keep your eyes and ears open for videos they might be interested in, documentaries, topics, lectures, museum visits, exhibits that are coming through. There's so much in everybody's area.
Right.
If you just ask, we ended up talking randomly to a neighbor about our glass blowing experience, only to find out that she sculpted glass pieces and did fused glass in her basement and had a setup. And my kids went over there for a couple weeks fusing
Right.
glass for
It
fun.
is so interesting when you find people around you who are already doing something that your kids have talked about. When I think even putting up a Facebook post, or does anyone in
Yeah.
in the Phoenixville community or something know about whatever, glass blowing or whatever it is? Because you'd be amazed at the special interest that small towns have, or that people around you would have. We went recently, there's an art show that's by my house, and it's set up in this barn, and this gentleman there was talking about this barn at such an extent that I was like, he really looks at this architecture and he knows all about his barn specifically, but then others around us. And then now my son, who's building, he continuously is rebuilding his Lego city upstairs, and he's been looking at all this architecture. And I was like, hey, why don't we ask that guy about how he does his what is necessary inside of this barn to keep it up and all that. And so we did. I think even just looking at what someone has been exposed to, and then asking that question of what can come next, or what can we learn from this, and who else is the authority on this subject, can then expand our kids' worlds so far.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The world is full of really interesting people. There's a mom in my membership community who runs a lavender farm in Colorado. Like
Amazing.
lavender, just
Yep.
lavender. And there's orchards and stuff around it too, but mostly lavender, and sent me lavender hot chocolate to try.
Love it. Yep.
It's just really interesting people all around you if you just start asking questions. So I think really when it comes down to any kind of child-led, interest-led, project-based, whatever learning, the best thing you can teach your kids is to ask questions and not worry about feeling dumb. Strike up those conversations and ask them. And you can model this at home by learning to ask open-ended questions to your kids, and that will also help you find those little sparks so you know what kinds of things to pull in front of them because you may have heard something. In my book, the one that came out recently, there is a whole section that has, I think it's close to 200 open-ended questions that you can ask about all sorts of different things just to get conversations going, because there's power in questioning people, especially your kids, but anybody around them. And the more you teach your kids that it's okay to ask questions and really dive in and get to know people, the more they'll do it too. And the more they'll learn about the world.
And people love to talk about what they're passionate about. And when your kids are growing up and they want to ask a question, to encourage that, I think is such a beautiful thing. Now, my husband and I, we talk a lot about, okay, there's a difference in asking questions and questioning people, right?
Yes.
And so we have talked about that nuance within our home quite frequently of, you are allowed to ask me why, you are allowed to ask me, these are lots of questions. How do I learn about that? Or what can I do in this situation? Or what happens when the frog lays an egg? Whatever. You're allowed to ask all of those types of questions. But questioning about people's views on something may be a lot harder, and depending on who you know, right? So there is a nuance there to work through with our kids. But so you've mentioned, you just said my book that came out recently,
Yes.
but you did not dive into that a little bit more. So let's finish with that. If you could dive in and tell us about this book and where can they find it and what else is in there.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, the book is called The Homeschool Advantage, a child-focused approach to raising lifelong learners. It came out, I don't know, a couple months ago. And it was published by Wiley Publishers, who's been around for over 100 years and originally focused just on education books and have branched into some homeschooling books and some parenting. So they're exposing their wider audience now to alternative education methods. And
Great.
the book it's really, I'm so proud of it. It's a culmination of so much work that I've done over the years, but really it focuses on the child. Homeschooling works best when you know your kid, and the main tenet throughout is know your kid, study your kid, be a student of your child, and follow their lead. And as long as you keep your kids at their best interests and needs at the forefront of everything, every decision that you make, you're going to be a successful homeschooler. You absolutely can do this because, again, you're doing it for your child. And I don't mean letting your kid say, I don't need to learn math, and being like, okay, my child doesn't need. No, it's knowing what they need, how to get them to where they're going. And there's lots of examples from my own homeschooling and my own 4 kids, but also stories from other families that I've worked with that are in the membership community that have shared their stories with me, along with practical things that you can do right now in your homeschool that goes along with each of the chapters. But one of the things that I love about just the whole theme of it is that if you focus on what your child needs and you find success that way, your kids are going to get to where they need to be and where they're meant to be because everything you've done has prepared them for that. I have 4 kids. All 4, the basic tenets of my homeschool look the same for all of them. The methods are very different. Actually, not even the methods. The content is very different. My oldest did barely any content area stuff in his high school. It was all about film, audio, video, editing, special effects, different things like that. And now he's a freelancer doing that as an adult. In fact, he leaves in a week to go do some filming for something. And then my daughter, who was very much into literature and writing and theater and performance, everything was centered around the fine arts and around literature. Yes, she did math. Was it as robust as her big brother and her younger brother? No, but it was what she needed to be able to get into a school and be able to balance her checkbook and pay her mortgage when she's an adult. And then my next one is completely into animals and the environment. And we've found a zoo program for her to volunteer for, a fellowship that she's getting paid for right now through the Metro Park system. She's looking at animal behavior colleges. And then my youngest, who's 11, is the video gamer and the Lego guy. And so he's just exploring things right now. Everything looks different. They've all done the same math, with the youngest and the oldest who are very mathy and are likely to be in mathy or algorithmic careers doing more advanced math. My youngest is 2 grade levels ahead, and he will go all the way through calculus because he talks about computer stuff and he talks about meteorology. He needs that. My middle 2, not as much. So
I really love the way that you're honing in on what they specifically need and want to do. And that's one of the biggest things within occupational therapy. We look at how someone needs and wants to occupy their time. That's what occupation is. And then we help them to be successful in that one spot. And not everybody needs to occupy their time in the exact same way. In fact, I would say nobody occupies their time in the exact same way. Now, there are certain things that carry over where, yes, you're talking about math, or we all have to get up and take a shower at some point. These things clearly we need to do the same or just make adaptations within that specific activity. But overall, our interests and our desires can be so very different from person to person to person. And that's what homeschooling allows for. And I love the way that you've been able to do that with your children, and how your book can help others to know how to do that as well. So great.
Thank you. Yeah, it's the best of all worlds, right? We get to give them that well-rounded education and the basics that they need, because everybody needs to learn to read and read to learn. They all need to be able to comprehend what they're reading. They need to be able to write and read what others have written and do math, understand basic tenets of science. They don't need to know every concept of science unless they're going into that career. They need to know how to infer, how to hypothesize, how to test things and retest things. And for history, they need to understand what's happened before, what should happen again and what shouldn't, and make critical decisions based on that. And so if we're doing that, it doesn't matter what direction we take it. It just matters that the main concepts are within it. And then they can spend all the rest of their time occupying it in the way that is most applicable to what they
And
need.
I guarantee they're going to make some connections back too, and be like, hey, this is what I learned in history, and look at what I'm doing right now. And when you see those connections made, it is such a beautiful experience as an educator and as their parents. It's just so good. Thank you, Colleen, so much for being here. And can you tell everyone where they can find you? I know we've mentioned it a little bit, but just put it all nice and succinct of where people can find you.
Yep, absolutely. You can find me at raisinglifelonglearners.com. Everything is there, my social media, the podcast, everything. And I'm either Colleen Kessler or Raising Lifelong Learners on all social media. And then my book, you can find it anywhere books are sold. There's a link on the website, but you could just find it by searching my name or the title, The Homeschool Advantage, on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. It's actually in Barnes & Noble stores, so if you've got one of those locally, you should be able to find it there.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
It is always a pleasure. I agree. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of The OT is In. If you're ready to dive deeper into how occupational therapy can support your homeschool journey, don't forget to check out the free downloadable resources at homeschoolot.com. You'll find Why Choose OT, a helpful guide that breaks down how OT can make a difference for your child, and guide to different service providers, so you can find the support that fits your family's unique needs. So head over to homeschoolot.com to grab those resources and take the next step in empowering your homeschool experience. Until next time, keep growing, learning, and creating a homeschool that works for your family. I'll see you next week.